good morning, and happy Sunday. Thank you all once again for coming along, and thank you for the kind anniversary wishes. Appreciate that. Barb and I got married 40 years ago last week on August 2nd, and pretty happy she said yes, and we've decided to keep going for another 40, so that's good. And so, it's nice to have the well wishes, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Was going to make this last night, but because I'm doing it Sunday morning now, usually I try to do it Saturday, but it got really stormy. So, which would have been appropriate for the context of what we're talking about, but doing it outside when it's stormy is a little problematic. So here it is today, and if you're getting it late, I apologize. And but there it is. So we're in Matthew chapter 14 and verse 22 to 33, and of course you'll recognize the story right off. And here it is. Directly after this, the feeding of the 5,000. So remember, John the Baptist got beheaded. He, was kind of bummed that all the people came, and the disciples said, "Oh, Jesus, what are you going to do about all these people?" And he said, "You do something." And then they said, "Well, we don't know what to do." And then he feeds the 5,000 people with the loaves and fishes. And then, right after that, is verse 22. So directly after this, he made his disciples get in the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he would send the crowds away. So, okay, guys, we've fed the 5,000. We're all done. So you guys get in the boat, head on out. I'll tell the crowds to go back home. And after sending the crowds away, he went up in the hills by himself to pray. So he was quite intentional about taking time out to pray and to maintain contact with the Father. Jesus wasn't haphazard about it. And in this case, of course, the disciples were like, "Well, you're just sending us on, kicking us out," and they said, "Yep, you head on, and then I'll be along in a little while, and we'll catch up." And of course, this is the days before cell phones, so it's not like, "Hey, where'd you guys end up on the other side of the lake there?" Oh, it was just like, "You go over to the other side, and I'll find you." And so that's how they left it. So Jesus goes up in the hills to pray, and when evening came, he was up there alone, and the boat was way out on the lake, and a storm came up. And so, this is verse 24, was battling with a heavy sea, for there was a headwind. Now, some are fishermen, so they know their way around a headwind, but still, if you're in a sailboat and you're trying to get to the other side, it's a lot of work. And so they're, having a hard time of it. It was the fourth watch of the night. That's just like between 3 and 6 a.m. And he went toward them on the lake, and the disciples saw him walking on the water, and they were terrified. "Oh no, Jesus who's walking on the water?" Because, they've been hard at it, and now here comes Jesus, and he's walking on the water. And the disciples saw him, and they were afraid. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But at once Jesus called to them, saying, "Courage, it is I, don't be afraid." And Peter answered, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you across the water." And Jesus said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and started walking toward Jesus on the water. But soon he felt the force of the wind, and he took fright, and he began to sink. "Lord, save me," he said. Jesus put out his hand and came over and said, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And as Jesus and Peter got in the boat, the wind stopped, And the men in the boat bowed down before him and said, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So, this obviously, got their attention in a way that some of the other miracles that he had done didn't. And they were amazed by that. But it struck me with the walking on the water, that it was not Jesus' first miracle. He'd just done the feeding of the 5,000. Just did it. And of course, he had been working his way along, healing people and driving out demons that whole time. Now, they're still new to Jesus' miracle working, but, it's not the first one he's done. He's done several miracles. And so they're not, it's not like Jesus' first rodeo as far as miracles go, but it is a biggie. But in the midst of the storm, it struck me that Peter, when he sees Jesus coming, recognizes it as Jesus, or who he thinks is Jesus, although, could be a ghost. And instead of saying, "Jesus, can I come out to you?" or "Jesus, prove it's you and not a ghost," something like that, that he says, "Jesus, command me to come out to you if it's you. If it's you, tell me to meet you out there on the waves. I'll hop out of the boat and go on out." And that always struck me as a strange way of interacting with Jesus. That instead of just making a direct request, you'd say, "Jesus, command me to come out, and then I'll know it's you." And why would that be the proof that it was Jesus? How would that prove that it was Jesus? Except whenever, on their way to where they were by the lake, feeding the 5,000, you notice how when Jesus healed people, he commanded them to be well. He commanded the demons to leave. He told them how to be healed. And it seems as though Jesus had that area of trust in Peter's life, that he knew that whatever Jesus commanded him to do would be good for him, would be the right thing for Peter to have happen to him. That there was a sense in which Peter knew that if Jesus told him to do something, that it would be in Peter's best interest to do it. Even something as crazy as hop out of the boat in the middle of a storm. Because that makes no sense. That's the last thing you would expect anybody to ask someone to do in the middle of a storm. "Oh, look, our boat is, we're getting rocked back and forth and the waves are high. And it's, we don't know what's going on. But, Jesus, here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell me to come out of the boat." And Jesus said, "All right, come on out." And against all odds, Peter's able to walk on the water for as long as he's, concentrating on Jesus and not the storm. And it struck me that when Peter said that, he was showing his trust in Jesus' well-intention for him. That he was showing that he believed that Jesus was one who would only ever command him to do things that were in his best interest and that would work out well for him. And that regardless of the danger, Jesus would be there to help him out. And that struck me because here we are in the midst of, a pandemic, a storm, a storm of disease, and stuck in our boats because there's a storm out there, and we're still dealing with it. Now I know there are all 1,000 opinions about whether we should still be isolating and whether we should just get back to it, and that doesn't seem right to me. That we would just decide that the pandemic's over, but I do recognize that we do have to deal with the reality of what it means to live in a pandemic, and how are we going to deal with that as we inch our way to open society. But as we look out from our individual lifeboats, our houses, the storm is still going to some degree. And it struck me that we need to think about, what are we going to ask Jesus to command us to do? What commands are we going to ask Jesus to make of us? Because when Peter asked Jesus, Lord, command me to come out, he knew that if it wasn't safe for him, Jesus wouldn't command him to do it. He trusted that Jesus would only give him a directive that was going to end up being in his best interest, and would prove to Peter who Jesus was. And Jesus knew that he was up to the task. So he said, "Mary, come on out," and he did. So as we look at our own relationship with Jesus, what is it that we're going to ask Jesus to command us to do? What commands are we going to ask Jesus to make of us? That's going to involve trust in Jesus to make it through. Now, and exactly what that looks like, I'm not sure, and I think it'll look different for each person as we ask Jesus to command us to increase our tithes, even though money's tighter now. As we ask Jesus to help us to increase the vitality of our prayer life, even though for me it's harder when I'm in seclusion. It seems like it'd be easier, but it's not. That when we ask Jesus to command us to make connections with our neighbors that have been difficult for us to do, even though it's it's a time of isolation. The fact is that I think Jesus could lead us to ways of having connection. I'm not even sure what it would look like, but I trust that God could work that out. But that what Peter was aware of was that his relationship with Jesus was one of trust, and that Jesus was going to ask him to do stuff that was in his own best interest. And finding out whether, Jesus was a ghost right now was in Peter's best interest. And that even if Peter failed because of his own inability, which he did, he started to sink, that Jesus was there to help him out. Jesus wasn't going to leave him alone. And of course it involved some, scariness and discomfort. But that there was, that the reality was that Jesus was still there for him. That Jesus was going to, be there to help him back in the boat and to figure out what to do next. And that's our job in the midst of in the midst of the pandemic, to listen to Jesus. It's okay to be afraid. The disciples were. But when we focus on Jesus and ask Jesus to command us, and notice Peter didn't say, "Give me any command you feel like." He asked Jesus to command him to do something that Peter thought would help him to increase his faith and belief in Jesus. And Jesus said, come on out. Knowing that Jesus had his back, knowing that Jesus had his best interest at heart. So from that standpoint, it's up to you and me then to consider our relationships with Jesus and to ask, what can we ask Jesus to command us? How can we increase our faith? How can we increase our ability to be Jesus' disciples? And what does stepping out of the boat look like? Whether it means actually leaving the house, which, it's going to happen sometime, or whether it means, something that keeps us in the house but lets us leave the confines of the house. We've talked about the fact that we as a church, even though we're separate, are still together. We're still God's people together. We're still God's servants, regardless of our inability to meet together. That meeting like this, listening to Pastor Kim online, maintaining contact, which I've got to say, I certainly appreciate the people who set up the chain of people, watching out for each other, and I appreciate Lisa Van Camp for calling me up periodically and seeing how I'm doing, and I value that. And making those continued connections, and that God would have us, you and me, figure out ways to maintain that. And I think God is looking for us to ask to be commanded. Where can we go? How can we serve? How can we get out of our metaphorical boats and be God's people? Whether it's in person, with a mask on, through email, or Zoom, or the telephone, whatever it looks like. I think God's asking us to think of the commandment we would ask Jesus to give us. It sounds like a roundabout thing. Knowing that Jesus will only command us to do that which will end up well for us, even if it looks dangerous at the beginning. Because getting out of the boat in a storm counts as dangerous. It kind of reminds me of when we were in summer camp several years ago. We were in North Carolina, and it turned out that summer Camp Bob Harden was the name of it, in Saluda, and it had more snakes than any other summer camp we'd been to. There were water moccasins in the swimming lake. There were rattlesnakes that, I stepped within 2 feet of one when I was taking a cut across between two paths, and stepped pretty lively after that. And it turned out that we had with us a guy who collects snakes and loves snakes, knows all about them, and he caught one of the canebrake rattlesnakes that were indigenous to the area, and got it and put it in a trash can, and it was there, and of course all of the troop was just enamored of the fact that we had this snake, and he intended on taking it home. As a matter of fact, he did, and donated it to Gatorland and for their snake exhibit, because they're not indigenous to Central Florida, and so they had the only canebrake rattlesnake in the area. And when he had it there in the trash can there in the middle of it, he kept a little brick on top to keep it safe, and he would, the snakes can go a while without having to eat, so everything was fine. One of the parents came up to me and said, "Are we really safe with the snake in camp?" And I had thought about that because, I had to answer to the parents, and getting home with kids with rattlesnake bites is, never a good conversation. And there's paperwork involved, so it's a mess. And so we had this, the parent came up to me and said, I, I'm a little worried. And I said, well, a couple things. One is, that Darda was the name of the assistant scoutmaster. You know that Darda is better with snakes than anybody. Well, yeah. And that he knows how to deal with them. Yeah. And you know that there are snakes all around that are, we've all walked by and had close calls. And said, yeah. Well, I said, really, the fact that we have this snake here with somebody who knows all about them makes this the safest place. Because that snake making noise is probably driving all of the other snakes away. And we know Darda knows how to deal with this one. So really, this is the safest camp out of all of them. And the parent thought about that for a second. And he said, I hadn't thought of it that way. That having the snake handler with a snake makes us the best off, even though it doesn't seem that way. And I've got to say, when I told the rest of the parents about it when they got home, not all of them agreed with me. But nobody got snake bites either, so there was that. But the fact is that when Peter knew that when you're in a boat in a storm and you see Jesus, the safest place isn't necessarily the boat. The safest place is with Jesus. Wherever he is. That's the place to be. And that was the case. He said, Jesus, command me to come out with you, to be with you. Here in the midst of the storm, you're where I want to be. And I think that that's where our focus needs to be too. Wherever Jesus is, we need to ask Jesus to command us to be there with him, whatever that looks like. And to ask him to help us to weigh the cost, to weigh the risk, to look at the risk and whatever it is, and to be mindful of it. And that means that, don't just, head up to Publix without your mask because that's, heading out of the boat. The fact is, Jesus does want us to get out of the boat, but metaphorically that could look like still staying in your house. But it could mean reaching out to people who need to be reached out to. So wherever Jesus is, that's where we need to be. And however Jesus is asking us to get out of the boat to be with him, we need to ask for that commandment. Just like Jesus commanded the demons to come out, and he commanded Peter to come out of the boat. That's our job too. Because I think that's the route to being God's people here in the midst of the storm. And the harder the storm hits, the bigger that needs to occupy our thoughts of how we can be God's people in the midst of it. Because we can be. God's power hasn't changed. I think our own perception of it needs to modify so that we see Jesus for who he is and listen for the call that he's making. Because the wind and waves still know the voice of him who commanded them when he was here below. That hasn't changed. Thank y'all for being in Sunday school another time. Hopefully very soon we'll be able to be together, but not this week. And I appreciate your cards and letters and your well wishes on email and phone calls. And I appreciate all of that. Love you guys. Thank you very much. And stay together. Talk to you later. Bye.